Jay, man, welcome back. It's been a while since we've done a podcast, and I'm always thinking about like, well, what's something I can ask that's not just getting into the meat and potatoes of questions. It's just what I always want to do. But I was curious. I was thinking about this. Like, I mean, dude, you've been through so many, like not just coaching, but like education, other coaches' systems, ideas. What was it like when you first started, like your first job? I'm curious, like what was your programming like approach to things? Like was it like five? I don't even know if 531 was around when you started. Like what before the 1x20, before all that stuff. What was Jay DeMayo's programming and systems like?
Well, back in the day, we used to take wheelbarrows and put rocks in them, and then we would put them in these bags and have to lift them over our shoulders. But no, back in the original program, God, I don't even know if I want to say this on the internet. I think that originally when we start, we're all very much by the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got building it out initially, I was brought in at Indiana State with a guy named Kip Hittrick, and it was very much going from more of like the NSCA 3x10, 3x8, 3x6, and then getting slowly introduced to the West Side methods in a combination of sorts with a bunch of Javoric's complexes. Fast forward a little bit, come here, I end out working with a guy who was as, if you could be West Side and not be at West Side, that's what Jim Roney was. To the point that like we had our max effort upper lower body days, dynamic effort lower body days, and we even had our accessory days that were brutal. Laps of lunges around the building and things of that nature, like the old idea of GPP, if you may. And then a little bit after that, Wendler did write 531, and that was kind of like the next step that led me to Yosef. And I think that most people have probably pigeonholed me in from there on out. But yeah, man, like back in the old day, it's like, it's kind of crazy to think about like how that metamorphosizes from thinking you know it all from a textbook to realizing you don't know anything because of a textbook.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine that perhaps the injury rates got a little better after losing the powerlifting and all that accessory volume.
I don't. Ooh, geez, that was so long ago. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of lessons that were learned in that, in the sense of like, whether you should or you shouldn't, you know that you can probably do more than you are.
Mm-hmm.
That especially in the college level, the 18 to 22-year-old is so able to adapt to so
Sure.
really many different, even just a variety, let alone an intensity and volume of stimuli. Doesn't mean that you have to do it, of course not, but the ability to do so is there. And I think that also too, like the evolution of the athlete and the world that we're in since 2004, really drives a lot of those decisions as well.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to think about almost like a window of trainability for that kind of thing, and it's like as you move from high performance 18 to 22-year-old, the window is more open. As you get older, if you're still training and coaching or playing, that window gets smaller. And I feel like for my master's track athletes, like especially if you're like 50 and up, like that window is like, it's like this little it's a very small sliver if it's there. But I think even like rotation, like sports of repetition, like tennis, that window is a little bit smaller than, or whatever it is. And to think of it that way for sure. But I think you're absolutely right, because if nobody could handle it, then I think common sense would say pretty quickly, well, let's just not do this. It's the people who can that keep driving that ship forward, certainly. And then, if you couldn't, then, well, something must be wrong with you or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not all David Goggins.
Yeah.
And we've seen what may or may not happen with those sort of training methods with fighters, but that's probably another talk for another day.
Yeah, yeah, without question. Yeah, it is. It is interesting to think of. Sometimes it's almost like, and I feel like for people who are coming up, in athletic performance and in the 2010s or 2020s, it's like what's West Side and five. It's like, but if you were around in the 2000s, like that, I remember when I was first, when I switched my major in 2005 from athletic training, sports medicine to exercise science. And honestly, I don't know why I was in. Athletic training was not a good fit for me for the 2 years I was there, but I actually didn't even know, like, oh, you can be like a strength coach. Like I never really had a strength coach. So I was like, okay. And the first thing I did was print off, this was 2005, about 400, 500 pages of all I could find, which was like Louis Simmons writing. And, this is how I got this guy's squat from 600 to 800. And of course, my mind's being blown because I'm like, well, I squat, I don't know, 315. And so all this is just like astronomical to me. And that was it. Like that was, if you were getting into the profession back then, that was it. So it's interesting to think about. You mentioned that, like, oh yeah, this is where what everybody was doing back then, or 531 or whatever. And again, not to say like a high performing athlete, couldn't be very stimulated by some of that stuff now, but I think we have a lot more window and insight to, like that spectrum of trainability now.
Yeah, and I also think too, Joel, that a lot of those different methods that we utilized back in the old days do have a place in a different realm, and I think that kind of going through sort of like a circular evolution, like we all do in a sense professionally, where you find places that they're very pertinent, like for example, with the guys now, because there's so many from so many different schools that do so many different things. You wanted to get into some of the tempo stuff and that later, but like utilizing different methods to ensure that everyone understands the techniques that you need them to utilize, that maybe isn't necessarily the primary function that the individual who came up with those methods utilized them for, but they can, as a byproduct of them, can really help improve at the least technical mastery, right? And like just going and piggybacking off Louis, I think we would both agree that I've never met someone who's good at box squatting that was a bad squatter, right? So if you want kids to understand how to squat and understand what depth feels like and looks like, and obviously a box squat is different. We can get into all that, and,
Sure.
But like we're going to do that with our guys who have started to learn how to get to depth and keep their postures and those sort of things, so they can understand how moving the bar with intent feels before we get into more of whether it be jump squats or combined jumps or things of that nature, so that they understand sort of the connection, right, between the postures and the positions and how you actually attack the movement, and then what the things are that are going to, do we want to say have a higher transfer? Because are we actually ever really sure or not? But, the things that maybe are more sexy and more explosive and bigger and people get more excited about, so that they can draw a line from A to B to C, so that at least they understand the methods behind the madness, so that they're a little bit more engaged. Because if you can find a little bit more engagement with them, you get a little bit more effort. And again, if intent drives adaptation, then that's what matters.
Yeah, I think the longer we've been around, you start to look at things almost with the barometer of intention and like stimulation, almost before some of the other minutia. And obviously, there's things that may be very stimulating that if you keep doing them for too long, it could be certainly a bad thing. But that's definitely one of those bigger pieces. And that's one thing where, funny enough, even with the powerlifting, like I don't include a lot of traditional power lifts in my programming. Bench press and some back squat. But I found myself last year at some point, and I don't remember what got me into this, but I was studying Louis' videos quite a bit. Not because I was going to use his programming directly into my own athletic templates, but more just to see mastery in his world. And yeah, I've trained with someone who actually spent some time there, and he talked about like some of Louis' concepts and the idea of like winning the workout, for example, and then like some of the differences between like Chuck Vogelpohl, who's just sheer intensity machine, and like Matt Wenning, like a more calculated approach, and looking at just looking at what ultimately drives it. If you were there, like to think, well, what if I was there, and then what would I learn from just outside of just like hearing about it? Trying to kind of create that vision. But there's always something to learn from actually being there, and then just studying that mastery aspect of it. I did want to ask you quick and kind of turning the page just a little bit into some turning the page into like maybe not nuts and bolts, but looking where this is taking you in terms of metrics. Just because outside of actual exercises, like what do you measure these days? Like what's important? Like with basketball, I guess specifically, we could talk about other things, but I think maybe where that lands is, well, what are the things that you find the most important with your population in the midst of it all, to put a measurement on that you're tracking to improve?
There once was a time, Joel, where I would have had a whole list of things, right? And I would have been like, we're targeting X, Y, and Z, and we're trying to move these things. I mean, when we get and we come back, we'll probably take a vert and a max vert. We'll probably run a 3/4 court sprint just so the guys can see it. The last 10, 15 years, we've been using 4 stacks with Vald. We've actually made the switch to Hawken recently. That was probably the biggest driver, though, when it came to actual training adaptations for the players. But not in a sense to necessarily change an adaptation or to change a direction, but to allow who the athlete is to dictate some of the decisions. And we've talked about this before. Like, there just has to be some form of like a simpleton test that it passes for me. If it's going to take more than 2 sentences to explain it to somebody, I've been hitting the head way too much to be able to focus and stay with that. So it's just, we looked at it and we were like, all right, we're fortunate enough to be able to understand what a typical basketball player's vertical looks like. One would think, just common sense wise, if you jump higher than the norm, you're in a good spot. Something you're doing is working right. Or at least is effective versus the average population. Let's say that. So then what is the one thing that we could look at that would probably have the greatest impact on that we could train around? And we came to the conclusion that contraction time would be the one thing we would want to look at. And it ended out being as simple as just like a square graph. If you jump above and you're a quick jumper, meaning your contraction time is shorter than average, like less than average, meaning you jump fast, then you would do exercise A. If you jump slow, you would do exercise B, which would be a longer sort of jump. If you jump below it, you would do, and our fast jumper, you would do something to increase the amount of time you're on the ground, with the thought process being, well, you're not producing enough force, so the easiest way for us to do that is to get you to load longer, to push more. And then vice versa, right? So if you jumped below and you were slow, then we would do something to try to speed it up. And it seemed to track pretty good. Talked through it with the guys, and they were like, well, that makes sense. So it's like, okay, well, that ticks a big box for me. And then we went from there. And then I think the other thing that we do track, and I think that it's something that if I were to give credit to the people who have had more of a pull in it, I would say, my athletic trainer and some of the assistants I've had in the past have done a good job kind of reeling me in on is, our daily tracking that we do with our team system, where really instead of looking to quantify practice, we are in the hopes of identifying outliers. I think that, we've talked about Cure a little bit before this, but he's got a great quote that if you took the average of every person on the planet, everyone would have a boob and a ball. So it's like we probably don't want the average for a 20-person basketball team to be what dictates the drill when one kid could run 0 meters and another kid could run 1,000 meters. So the average is 500, but the kid who ran 1,000 still got cooked. The kid who was sitting on his butt, eating Cheetos, didn't do nothing. So we look at it and we try to identify, was one of our trackable metrics, which is simply just like the arbitrary training load, decelerations, total distance, and heart rate over 90%, were one or any of those an outlier, meaning above a half or a full standard deviation to what their normal day is. And if there's a spike, chances are we should provide them a little bit of extra recovery modalities so that they can come back and be ready for tomorrow. Again, that's just kind of graybeard simpleton thinking of it. I'm sure that there's going to be someone in the comments that is like, yeah, but you can quantify every drill in practice. Well, you can. Have fun. I know Chris knows what he's doing. I've gotten to work with him this will be our 21st season, and I know what he's looking for and what he needs from me. And what he needs from me is simply to ensure that his players are able to practice more often for a longer duration at a greater intensity. None of that includes me going up to his office and saying we can only do dummy offense for 4 minutes instead of 5 today. My job is to make sure that if they did 4 yesterday, they're ready to do 5 tomorrow.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is like where you've gone with like player load and that data is more just like whatever your individual curve, you're not a good runner, you're a good runner, you can tolerate a lot, you can't. How does what you did fit with your own like kind of profile? I guess on the outset, right? Like that's pretty simple. I'm sure on the inner workings with all the little calculations, it's pretty complicated. But but as a general principle, it is pretty simple.
Yeah, like what was today to you? Like somebody could come off and like today could be a bear of a day for Joel, but it could have just been a normal day for me. And we understand a lot of the things that lead to those bears of days, right? Like if you're the starting 5-man and we're giving you a pro day and I'm your number 2, well, there's going to be a bunch of reds for me because I'm pulling a whole bunch more reps. But that doesn't mean they're going to give them tomorrow off. So now it's our job to make sure that, hey, so what recovery modalities do we need to do? Are there anything that we got in the weight room tomorrow that maybe we want to just repeat or back off or change or whatever it may be so that we can ensure that we keep the main thing, and that is that they get better at their craft.
Yeah. I was going to say, if it was coming down to a Versa climber training activity, I would definitely be in a lower bracket, I'm sure, than you watching your videos on that. My legs I remember when I was in graduate school, we had to do a VO2 max test for both running and then cycling. And I'm so not lactate, friendly, I guess, how my physiology operates. Like my VO2, it was like 60 in running and it was like 39 if this is quotes because of course it is what it is. But if it's on the bike, my VO2 is 39. if it's running, I can be bouncy and it's 60. It's probably the true one is probably somewhere in the middle. But that just being said, I would definitely be an easy day for you would be a hard day for me on a Versa climber without question. But I wanted to ask you actually in lines of recovery modalities, because I think that's an interesting one in the sense that, it's like, okay, well, I guess you foam roll more and just a lot of people that would lend you to that, or I don't know, sit in the Normatec or something. But I think about this a lot, like with even like a 1x20. Now, I mean, if you did max 1x20, it's a different story. But I think about stuff that's kind of like that, 60 to 80%. I feel a lot better if I was fatigued, like doing something like that compared to, hey, you're going to go do a few heavy sets of 5 or something. I mean, it's not even close. So I'm curious what that looks like. Like, what does that look like in a nuts and bolts perspective, either from strength training modalities, like someone's a little cooked. How are you adjusting? Is it stuff that's just more variable type repetitions in the weight room? What are you looking at there?
Yeah, I think a little bit of all of it, right? I think so. The blessing and the curse of being in the same place for 20 years is you understand and you're able to build out systems that fit into the system that you're part of. And, we've been able to toy around with a whole bunch of different training philosophies. And, obviously, Doc has had a massive impact on what we do. But even with that, we've kind of made some modifications to it to fit more, not just around how Chris wants things to go, but how the athletes that we typically get here handle the weeks. So a lot of the time it's going to be, for the whole year, it just builds into preparing for the in season, right? And that's going to be a game day +1, -1 setup, where game day +1 is going to be more single leggy and pulling and some mobility work and starting to get into like some rebuilding or regenerating of ranges of motion, and then some strength through it and some projection type exercises like his band lunges and those sort of things. But so it's built in that the goal of the day is to actually do that. And then if they're beat up, dinged up, whatever it may be from the day before, a couple sets of 4 or 5 that are just under control or being used for mobility or whatever, the lower intensity stuff can turn into 6s or 7s or 8s.
Yeah.
And then the things where we're looking at projection, if you bang out a few good ones, as long as you're ready and you feel better for practice, cool. Is there a magic number of lunges or jumps that if you do X, you are instantaneously going to become a faster sprinter or better at cutting and changing direction? If there is, email me. I don't know it. I know that if they feel better and they are able to move better and they go out and they practice better the day after the competitive day or the day after an off day, because for whatever reason, the guys that we have typically have a hard time after off days, then the better the next day is. And the better game day -1 is, typically the better game day is. So it's been sort of built in through the experience of what we've seen with the guys, while allowing some of that autonomy as we go through. Joel, I think the other thing too that people sort of mistaken where our role can be with that, because for a while, again, going back to like back in our day, we used to talk about we're like stress managers, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of like in the real big heyday of like Omega Wave and readiness, trainability. Like that's kind of what everybody said that our role was. And I think the big lesson that needs to be continued with that is stress to you may not be stress to me. Mm-hmm. So if I've got 15 guys on the roster, there may be 5 guys that, for whatever reason, if you alter their training program, they're going to freak out. They're going to be more stressed out. There may be 5 guys who are just going to do whatever they're supposed to do because they just tick boxes and move on. And there may be 5 guys that if you give them a rep or 2 off, or a set or 2 off, or a pound or 2 off, they may think you just moved the mountains for them and everything is fixed. So you've got to understand the man more than the metrics when it comes to the young people, or the woman more than the metrics when you're dealing with the people that you're dealing with, because the moment you start thinking these metrics and these technology pieces, as great as they are more of a deity than a driver, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said about like the stimulation value or the intent value of what you give. I think it's very similar there. Like you could give a particular movement to a group of athletes, and a number of them would find tremendous intent out of that, while others may find a little bit less. And to what you said too, I think that's so important, is that to understand how an athlete is perceiving an adjustment to a workout. Even like, how does this athlete perceive this? How does this? And I remember talking quite a bit about this, or at least on some level, with when it was about 2013 or 14, was a lot of the portals were really coming in, like Bridge Athletic is what we had at Cal, Team Builder or Coach Me Plus, like all those things. And your athletes are starting to punch in their, if you didn't have it already, they're punching in like their daily metric, like 1 through 5 or whatever it is on a variety of things. And there was always those athletes who, no matter what, they're always a 5. They can't be a 4. Like, and then you have other athletes, they're always like a 2 or something. They always undershoot out of 5 or whatever it is. And you would think about, well, how would an athlete who's a 5 out of 5, and I have to be a 5 out of 5, perceive, oh, well, you need to take it really, it's almost like you have to trick them into like working less hard, on that day or something like that. Or you have to tell them a different story about it versus that athlete who comes in and the athlete who's always a 2 is like, oh, please give me a special workout, please give me something. Yeah. And again, it just speaks to that's the art of coaching. And I think maybe that's something that, when people talk, oh, the art of coaching. Well, what is it? I think it's what you're just saying. Yeah. And we just don't, I think that's the thing that actually doesn't get talked about enough because, well, what moves the needle at the end of the day with a group? It's understanding those things, you say, well, what's this coach's system or that coach's system? And a lot of it is you understand how people operate and what they need. And yeah, just sort of what you said, I just think those are conversations that we should have more often. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think that it's important too with that they understand where your progressions truly are going to build them to. Because, it's really easy to sit here and just put a bunch of exercises on a piece of paper and use big words, to talk to these kids and them to kind of get lost in the translation of what we're really trying to do. But can you sit there with your 3 steps of your off season and just have them look at it and be like, so what do you see? And just listen, and then talk them through it, and then that'll drive even more questions. I've got 2 or 3 guys on the team right now that we actually did that with, and we're starting phase 3 now. But there were some things where it was really slow, controlled, pauses. Then it's just certain different aspects of the exercise are controlled because you've got to be able to perform things savagely before you perform them savagely, right? Like we're putting in, especially in basketball, dude, like I'm putting people who are not built for a weight room in a weight room. Well, do they have the strength and the mobilities to be able to get into these positions and hold these postures to be able to move under control? And I think that when we talk about under control, people start to say, well, yeah, but you just talked about intent. Well, that's the intent. The initial intent that's driving the adaptation is to move slow and controlled, to be able to keep your posture in a perfect alignment while you're doing X, Y, or Z. Intent driving adaptation doesn't always mean that I'm trying to move the bar at 1.5 meters per second, or I'm trying to throw a ball as high as possible. Intent can mean I need to get to parallel in a squat, keep my ribs as vertical as possible, keep my shoulder blades down and back. I need to be a rock in that position for that 4 count. And when JD says up, that has to move in one piece and it has to look perfect. Like, we get too excited in the stuff that is really cool for us, which is the chains are ripping off the ground, or the bands and the bars are rattling at the top, and it's a 405 squat or it's a 315 bench. When really, I've started to become more and more excited around watching them do things just so locked in, technically mastering the positions, and then watching that carry over in the next couple weeks as they do it. Not controlled is not the right way to say it, but not as controlled. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're not just like dropping the bar and like whatever, but allowing them that freedom and it carrying over, and the postures to be better, and the positioning to be better, and the outputs to be exponentially better. And that is what has become really fun for me.
Yeah. Something you said with that, I just wanted to go back. I have a thought on that one. I missed this before. I just thought it was really, I thought it made me think about, like, so oftentimes I feel like, with those outputs, the bars rattling, like the stimulation, a lot of times that tends to work in a more descending manner. Like you go 10, 8, 6, 5 on a squat set or something, or a bench set. You work from a pump to some nervous system stimulus. Or I would see this in, I know we've both worked with swim a lot in that strength coach capacity, and I would watch them on deck. And their stimulus days were always descending sets, like 200, 150, 100, or 150, 150, or something like that. And you end on the fastest, most powerful. That was always their race model type days. Even though, funny enough, in a meet, it might not necessarily go like that. But that's what got you the highest stimulus. But then you were talking about, okay, you have an athlete who's not, they're a little beat up, coming back with ascending. And I think that's something we don't talk about. Like, all right, come in and do a set of 4. All right, now do a set of 5. Now do a set of 6. And it makes me think about, I've heard this, I guess you call it like a heuristic or whatever mental model, but like if you're feeling like you don't want to work out or something, and maybe this was just more pitched towards like a general population, but it could be an athlete on a day they don't want to train, is just do 1 push-up. Okay, well, I did 1. Oh, I guess I can do 2. I guess I can do. And there's those just my own training yesterday. Like I came in, I had a really good session on Saturday, fast sprinting, stimulating, powerful. I tried some new stuff with the Beyond Power Voltra. That was like a kind of an eccentric overload for my hand. I mean, I was torched. And so I'm good. It's like a strength day, and I just literally started just playing around with, like, if you ever saw the Marinovich training with those little water bell things, it literally started with that. But by the end of it, I was going pretty good on the U-bar. Like, not crazy, but it turned into a pretty good session. But I had to start with that just, hey, let's just move. And then, oh, I did that, so I guess I can do this too. And I get it, and it's, that's like that organic emergent art of, well, how far can we take this today? Like, what do we have in the tank today? I don't think I'd know unless we started with some of this more remedial stuff, and now here we are. And whereas things are usually just so purely prescriptive as well. So I think, that got my wheels turned, but I just think that's not mentioned enough as well in that art of coaching, is that like where can we take this session from a practical perspective. And now I'm forgetting the thing I was going to tell you on the bit on the stimulus. I'm going to have to write down a little bit to get back there. But I'm glad you mentioned that as well with it all, for sure.
I think, though, that we talk about therapeutic things and all that all the time as well. And we talk about how motion is lotion, right? Like, it helps you get things going and get things moving and this and that. So sometimes just getting out of their way and letting them kind of work their way through things is the best thing for them too. Like in a day and age where athlete tracking and load management is really still some key, sexy, fun term, getting out of their way and letting them figure it out a little bit might be the best thing for them.
Yeah, that's one of those things too, where like you look at what it was like in the 2000s or the 00s. I don't think, and again, like it can be trendy to talk about autonomy, but authentically, like finding ways for athletes to solve problems, it's like is so important. So I actually let me the thing I wanted to mention, and I had autonomy as a question too. I thought you had some really cool notes on that I'd read, and I wanted to dig into that. But what you said about the structure, I just think it's so interesting to see how different, and maybe this goes back to like a 5-3-1. It's a very stimulating. That's if we had I'd made a quadrant the other day I was just writing in my notebook, and I've been thinking about this for a while. But if we had a quadrant, it's like in one corner we have things that are very stimulating, and another we have things that are very structural, and another we have like more skill, and then in another we have spirit. So what is the mind and the way we process these things? And I think a lot of things, it's easy to be inherently stimulating. Like that's the box that everyone wants to do and post, and like it's exciting, but it's like looking at established coaches, like that structure is so critical. And even like Westside, like they did a ton of GPP to have the underlying structure be that could support lifting 800, 900, 1,000 pounds or whatever you're lifting. But I think a lot about Jay Schrader's system, for what the story, the stories is exaggerated, like what actually happened, I mean, I think there is so much brilliance in the simplicity of it all. And Jay, one of his big things, as far as I know, I've never actually trained with him, but it's like position is first. That you get position first, and then you can do the other things. And I think he got it more through at some point, because I guess Adam Archuleta didn't use the long ISOs, which is interesting to me. Back in those those big videos or whatever that were in the early 2000s. But I've found like the adding of just isometric holds for extended periods of time as basic position work was really, really helpful. But that's not the only way you could get that. In fact, that is one. It takes a lot of willpower to do it. I mean, there's other ways. I do think at some point it's good for people to do that, just to feel that and understand it. But it's not the only way to do it. And I heard what you were talking about there. I saw you posting like some of the time under tension, like the Selyanov-based squatting that I wanted to get into as well. Just because that's another thing I think that isn't talked about that often. Maybe it's because it's too slow twitch. Here, you got the quotes in there. But so I want to dig into that because I do want to get back to autonomy. But that's one of those things where you had some really good posts, Jay, and one of them was like on quad girth, like in return to play, and like, well, hey, if you want to improve that, do you want to do 3 sets of 3, or do you need to actually give the legs some pretty substantial volume? You need to give it some volume. So tell me about that. I don't want to dig into but tell me about like your approach to structure, your approach to being okay with some higher volume or higher reps, and what that means for athletes who are being robust. And then I do say I got to throw this. I hate when I add too many questions, but it's just like I know there's people who are like high reps and too many slow twitches, and what's it going to do to your vertical? Like address like the power piece too, because I think sometimes people can be at ends with those. Yeah. How much of each is in a program?
I guess the answer to the last one is as much as you need. And yep, that's my cop-out answer for the podcast. Thanks. But no, I guess I don't look at it as much as slow twitch or volume or things of that nature, as much as I look at it as what are the things that we need to do exercise-wise? What are the means that we want to select that are going to potentially have the greatest impact on performance? And then we just back out and we say, what do we need to do to be able to do those at the highest level possible? And to do that, what are the situations or issues that may arise that can lead to technical errors? For example, like we can get into the quad girth one in a second, but like I was very fortunate to learn the USAW performance coach classes. So this was before a lot of their stuff now, through the late Harvey Newton. And Harvey was amazing. And he spent 2 days with us, and we went through all these things. And he left us with the message of, if you're only going to do 3 things that you've learned in this class, it would be to squat, press, and pull. And I was like, okay, well, this guy's a lot smarter than me, and he's done this for his whole career. And when we do get into any sort of the lifts or the variants, we now will do like snatches from a hang. Back in the day, I used to think that they were too hard to teach, but now I think they're the easiest of all of them to teach.
Yeah.
But we get into presses, like push presses, and we get into clean pulls from a hang or snatch pulls from a hang, usually mid-thigh. But to teach it, we teach on a tempo. And most people, when you would say you do the lifts on a tempo, would probably look at me cross-eyed. But yeah, like the problems occur in the presses and the pulls because you don't know A, where the starting position is, or B, where the catch position is. Like, period. And I think we would both agree that 99% of the time, if you can fix them getting full verticality, I don't know why that's hard to say, for either one, whether it's all the way through on the press, on the ball of your foot, hips stacked over your knees, stacked over your ankles, shoulders over everything, head through, or the pull, same position, only now shoulders up, ribs high. People don't finish all the way through, or they press at an angle, or they throw their ribs back, and because they don't know where that position is. So can we find the start in a slow count to understand where that is? Can you hit right out of it, and can you catch it and hold it there? Or can you catch it and hold it there? And what we're hoping to see as we've seen in the past, is that after doing it at speed a couple times, because it's obviously different, right? When you take the control out, you've just taken, the speed control out of the car, right? You're not driving a gas car anymore. You step on the gas of the Tesla and you're at 65 miles an hour before you know what you're doing. Now you're up and you're trying to find the positions. Once you can now figure out how to navigate that, the lifts look better. And when the lifts look better, the lifts can be heavier. When the lifts can be heavier, the force output can be greater. When the force output can be greater, then the transfer, hopefully, can be greater. So I say that to go all the way around and to say again that, like, the goal is to then break down ways to increase their ability to understand what you want them to do by using the least amount of coaching cues and allowing them to get into the positions and to do them because you've put them in the position that they are figuring it out themselves. It's a kind of a joke that I have with the guys and with the high school swimmers that I get to work with. When you are having to cue them and they stop and they turn their head in the middle of a set, it's like, yo, my voice is bad enough. The last thing you want to do is see me and hear me during a set. Like, it'll freak you out. Focus on what you're doing and just try to pay attention and get through it. But that's really what it comes down to, is can we build out our progressions, whether it be exercise A to B to C, whether it be method or pace or tempo or whatever from A to B to C, to put them in the best possible position to utilize the means that we find to have the greatest transfer in the long run.
Yeah, interesting you had said that. With the positions, I had just I was just cleaning out my computer desktop today. And I had saved this. I saved these random screenshots of coaching concepts I find interesting, and it was like Ido Portal, like one of his principles, and it's almost like once you get that far into the movement, realm, it becomes a lot more about how you move. But he was saying, like, well, he's like, fluidity between the positions is the ultimate, but he's like, you do occasionally want to stop at positions as well. That's another way you can learn things. And it's probably the most hands-off way, especially with lifts or things that are, if you don't just want to start flinging barbells around. Maybe if it's just your body weight, it could be a little bit different story. But, that positional learning. I know for me, like the Glenn Penlay 3-step or whatever, like, below the knee position, top of the thigh position, legs aren't quite extended yet. Like I used that to teach swimmers for a long time. And it was just me. A lot of times it'd be me and like 35 swimmers. And they could learn it on their own so well. The only thing that was a little janky, and I actually blame myself for this because I think I probably overemphasized this, was to get a second pull, because the second pull is the ultimate thing that kind of emerges. It's like emergent. We want to use the motor learning term. But like I think sometimes if people couldn't figure that out, I would just tell them to like push their knees forward more. And then I had a few people out of those 35, I'd get like 5 guys just smacking the shit out of the bar by driving their knees forward into too much. If it was me now, it's like, all right, how can we use some variability to help them just kind of come up with that solution? And not that doing the perfect clean is going to make you the ultimate swimmer, but it's like you do want people to learn things well and do things well. But even it is interesting, that concept that you mentioned of like saying less, it shows up everywhere too. It shows up in, I've had the opportunity to coach youth soccer with a really good organization here in Loveland, Ohio. But they model themselves after a lot of like concepts of very high level programs. But the funny thing is how that resonates with kids is you actually like the founder of it. She's like, yeah, when I'm on the field, coach them, I don't say anything. I just let them play. And this is like 6-year-olds. Like they don't need a coach saying, hey, get there. It's like, it's kind of the same whether you're 6 or, 18. You have to have that time and space and silence, not necessarily silent depending on what you're doing, but to figure it out yourself and at least problem solve for a little bit before someone steps in. And I think that happens. It's almost like that is that paradigm. I'm sure there's a lot of weight rooms where it's like everything is coach up everything, and it's like, well, at what point do you get to feel how this felt, or how you put this together, or like, oh yeah, I finally got it. Like there's that feeling, maybe we forget of what it feels like to get something because you You got the base thing that you needed, the positions you needed, and then you got it. And a lot of that's just watching other people. Maybe you're watching the person to your left and your right do it, the exercise at the same time when you're all doing the same thing, and you're like, oh, this is how they're doing it, and you kind of maybe we just discount that too with that learning process.
100%. And another thing I like to do too is when we get into that is have them help each other.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all paired up. I've just got one pair of eyes. So, and it's good because that's when they actually start to really understand it, is if they can say, like, you're pushing your hips too far back. Like, let your knees come forward, get into a jump position. I mean, we could sit here and yell dip and drive till we're blue in the face, but if a kid doesn't understand what that jump position actually is like, what are we doing? We're just, yelling to hear ourselves scream. But yeah, I don't want to undermine the importance and the impact that knowing how to cue and teach and build these out as the foundation is, the addition to it that to me has been the part that has helped them become even better at some things that I feel have been very challenging to them, at least the population I get to use, get to work with on a daily basis, is putting them in situations and positions where you can slow them down or put them where they need to be, and they find it themselves without realizing that you've put them where they need to be and that they've found it themselves. And we just had a group of guys, was it 6'11", 6'9", 6'7", the first time ever, off tempo, no control, snatches, push press, clean pulls. By the third set, all locked in. Now, are they snapping, 100 kilos over their head? Of course not. Are they pulling, 300 pounds? Of course not. It's day one. But day one looked really good by the end of it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that not only were they put in the positions, but they had the intent through what was set up to learn the positions so that it has the ability to now have the intent of moving it violently. And I think we skipped that part. At least I know I did. Like, I can't speak to whoever's listening, but I know for a fact that I did. And now that we've revisited it, I think that that's one thing that I'm very happy we went back and revisited this offseason.
Yeah. Yeah, with the intention, too. One thing I've always enjoyed is supersetting. I mean, again, if you haven't been doing anything, you don't need a circuit right away. But I always liked circuiting the Olympic lifts with like a vertical throw with a med ball as high as you can or something as far as you can. Because it's like, hey, just remember, like the ultimate goal of this is a maximal expression. It's not just doing this lift and can we circuit this in. I wanted to go more into.
It's great that you say that though, because that's where it leads to.
Yeah,
game day -1. It's our French contrast as our primer. It'll be a snatch, a throw, a clean pull, and then the jump based on the force plate. It'll be a push press, a throw, something with the jammer maybe, or some other like projection, and then some form of like a long jump again based on what their force plate numbers are. And it's. We could talk about potentiation and this, that, and the third with it, and whether it's more just a lump 3 feet above your ass, or if it really is actually like physical, or yada, yada, yada. But my favorite saying at the end of the bench is, every time it works, it does. And the guys seem to love it.
Yeah.
I've never been yelled at about that day. I've been yelled at a lot about game day +1. I've never been yelled at about game day -1. So...
Yeah, it's very similar, like a lot of prescriptions. I think that, people talk about the potentiation, but there's different ways potentiation runs too. There's, just raw nervous system. Like if you squatted and did a vertical jump, it's very basic. Like, does that work? But I think as soon as you put skill into it, you have a few layers out that really matters, especially if you're an athlete,
Mhm.
because skill is that's it at the end of the day, And I think unless you can find, like, it's also like a problem solving. Can you find a way to link? And you really don't have to think about it. Like, you do a clean, you do a throw. It feels good. It should feel good and pretty similar either way. And if you're good at switching back and forth and you can make the two better, and that's your problem to solve, then you're going to come out the end of it a better athlete, even if you're a potentiation person or not or whatever.
Mhm.
And I think you can always modulate it too. Use a little bit lighter weight maybe, and you threw the ball farther. Use heavier weight, you threw it farther, or whatever it is, depth jump or whatever. So that's
Yep.
just, to me, it's like it gives you more colors to paint within the given session for sure. There's all that. Yeah, it's just so much of it. How do you actually shake that out to make it that optimal experience, for those athletes? And yeah, like you said, like people that you probably on the autonomy sheets, like I've never had athletes be like, oh, French contrast, it sucks. Like it's
Yeah.
give me like the heaviest bar to lift, like I don't want to do this other stuff, like, yeah, it's always, I think there's always those helpful pieces of it all.
Oh yeah. 100%, dude.
Yeah. Okay, so I did want to get into back to like the structure and the tempo and like the return to play and the quad size. I want to go to one of the prescriptions that you had, or at least it was an exercise. You were posting yourself doing this, like high reps, like I don't know, it's like 4 sets of 10 with a tempo, like split squat, that kind of thing. Because that got me thinking about like holding extreme iso lunge for 5, like extreme versions of things. But tell me a little bit about, just because again, I think so much goes to the outputs, and we don't talk as much about that other supportive end of it. Tell me a little bit about how you would run that supportive, like split squat, or if it's another exercise, and getting more volume out of that, and to meet an athlete's needs. Like, who needs that? Who doesn't? What's the range that you might use for a group of athletes with that kind of thing, especially as that base layer? Tell me about some nuts and bolts of that training method that you're using with that supportive structural piece.
Yeah, so you're talking about what I guess we would consider the Silyunov's oxidative
Mm-hmm.
squats. So, the primary reason we've gotten into that split squat progression was based off a conversation with Charlie back in 2020, I want to say now, where Achilles ruptures just started to become sort of more prevalent. And he asked, if people thought that maybe the fact that we didn't do reverse lunges and step ups as much could be leading to that. Now, I'm not saying that to say that this is a cure-all or this is anything like that. I'm just saying that bringing that up because it was a question that made me think that if we're looking at that false step action, and we know that what we don't know, we assume that athletes do that in a sense to increase our outputs going forward, right? That we need to be able to strengthen those actions. But in order to strengthen the actions that are going to show up in the game, which would be more like Doc's lunges, we know that there are some limiting factors to those movements. And the first is typically the hip flexor flexibility, mobility of that back leg, right? You can only go back as far as that hip flexor goes. So we started doing a rear foot elevated split squat. It started in 1x20, and we moved it to the oxidative one simply because we now have the opportunity to go through multiple repetitions with a break to really make sure that we're able to get down into that full position, and that, knock on wood, is not what's slowing us down. And that leads us into different split squats because, the next thing we know that's a limiting factor in that reverse lunge is the big toe, right? Because that doesn't flex as well. We can get into different holds and stuff that we've done in the past, but really, you need to be able to hold that bottom position secondarily. But coming back to it, that oxidative method, not just are we learning the positions and improving the mobility of the back leg, the athlete's learning control posturally through that range of motion. So you're teaching yourself to keep your chest up, to keep yourself in line. We're increasing the range of motion by moving the foot forward, away from the rack to do that. And then there's all the hypothetical things, right? The things that Dr. Selyunov spoke about here when we're talking about possible hyperplasia, the type 2 fibers, improving oxidative capacity through that, all of those things. Do we know that that happens? No, we don't. It's just like zone 2, like we talk about that being left ventricle eccentric hypertrophy. Well, I've never cracked a chest open after we've done 3 weeks of zone 2 work to be able to tell you whether or not it does expand more. Who knows? But what we do know is what we've seen anecdotally, and the guys that are able to get into those positions better are able to sink into that and extend their foot out, get all the way down, hold their posture up. They lunge better. They get their back foot further. They're in a better position to be able to do this. And then that leads into projection. So the lunge going through instead of it just being like a typical step back, feet together, like, I don't know, do they call it a hip lock still? Where you push through and you're either up on a box or something like that. And then that is what leads us into Dr. Yesis's special exercises with the lunges. We put it in front of the guys. We show them. They say, oh, that makes sense. So I stick with it. Do I talk to them about type 1 hyperplasia? Or do I talk to them about, mitochondrial biogenesis? No. I say, listen, we're going to do this because this is going to help you keep your posture, sit lower, so you can stretch out your hip flexor. And also, like, there's a point to it too, Joel, that like going through it because it sucks matters. Like, we want them to train with intent. We want them to train to move things fast and heavy and explosive. But if you've never like been to the point where you're doing a split squat or a lateral squat and your leg is shaking and you look like you're standing on a power plate, but you're just holding a power block, I don't know if you are also cognitively ready to be able to attack a weight. Like, you have to understand the suck to be able to like fight through that. You know what I mean? Like, and not to go like all meatheady with it, but like there's an intrinsic value to that, to knowing that you can keep pushing. Just like if you're at the last rep of a bench and you're like, you could keep pushing. Now maybe you won't quit and you'll get the 5th or the 4th or the 3rd or the 20th, whatever it is, right? Because sometimes the byproducts of what we're trying to do are truly what's going to find value with the kids. And they don't necessarily need to know that that's just a byproduct, that it's not the actual technical goal. But yeah, man, like, we used to do them bilaterally. I don't really like them bilaterally as much. I think that you're probably going to get more of what Victor talked about through like bilateral squats than you will unilateral squats, the hormone spikes and all that stuff. But yeah, man, like, again, knock on wood, it's been a great tool to teach technique. And also, like, the one that I didn't post about that we've used it and I think it's had pretty good success with is like rowing exercises. Not pull-ups, but like rowing exercises. Like actually figuring out how to pinch and pull together. Because oddly, a lot of kids have a hard time with that. Yeah, again, going back to full circle, putting them in a position where the modality and the method are what teaches them how you want them to do it.
Yeah. I like what you said, they're type 1 fibers. Don't say the slow twitch word.
Yeah.
Don't say the slow twitch word. But that's just one of those things, too, where, yeah, it just takes me back to, I was just thinking about that. I keep thinking about my quadrant with like the stimulus on one end, and then structure is a different box because things that are stimulating are often not necessarily hard in the sense that where we train something, it's almost like, when you're a kid, I like thinking about, like Jeremy Frisch has talked about, most people know who Jeremy is, big youth sports, youth training. And it's like you reach that point somewhere in adolescence where you're ready to train something. When you're a kid, like there's no point. It's funny because, I think a lot of kids get roped into weightlifting when they shouldn't because an adult saw them just trying something out, just exploring. Like, hey, I'll just pick up these weights or this kettlebell or something, just see if I can lift it. And then that becomes licensed to, air quote, train, where you're actually experiencing a discomfort to get something. And I don't know, I just think it's important to give training its given due when you're ready for it in that structural box. And yes, this is going to suck at some point. There is, and it's like, rounding out a training program, you make sure you're checking your appropriate due in those things. And yeah, it reminds me of like the 2-3 minute ISOs. I just love how that's how you got to that place. Like I think that place is there. It's like you have the ISO, long ISO holds on one end. Funny enough, I've actually gravitated away from some of the real long holds. I just got sick of them. Like I'll take 4 sets of 10, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's like anything, like building those underlying qualities and sitting with discomfort. And there's something to that. It was maybe not entirely related. I don't have Joel Reinhardt back on the show here in the near future, but he had a quote saying that just from a general physical preparation standpoint, there is something to a team that can handle extensive tempo well. It's something. It's a training modality. Like this is a structural. We're here to train this thing. And there is that, some level of discipline, some level of how you deal with things that are uncomfortable found within this. And obviously there's a limit to that. Like, there's a limit to anything. But I'm interested. I think that's so. Was it? I think you said like something like along the lines of there's like a 4. Everyone's like, what's the sets and reps? What's the magic number?
Yeah.
But like so for these split squats, and I do agree. I think that makes way more sense than a back squat because if you're looking at more game-like adaptation, that represents the positions the muscles to be in. It makes good sense, just like the lunge. But what, like set, rep, tempo, those kind of nuts and bolts, like what, where do you start and what are you looking to work to with your population?
So we take a week to build to it. We start with 2 sets of 10 per leg, and it's just a 2 count up, 2 count down. So it's a 40-second set, 40 on, 40 off. But in practice, it should be 4-ish. It should be whatever day one is. The next time you do it that week, it should be half the volume. And that's getting into kind of more of like the developmental stimulatory model of periodization, where like you get the spike and then it starts to level out and just tap it to keep it moving up. But I think that what we did to alter it a little bit made more sense to me. And that is, instead of repeating the load day 2, we added 5 pounds or so, so that they could be comfortable with it before they hated it.
Yeah.
Because 2 series is, I mean, you could have a sandwich. But those last 2, by the time you're sitting there, 3rd set, you're in your 8th rep, 2 down, 2 up, constant movement, no locking out, no tapping the floor, no stopping. Like, it gets a little shaky now. So yeah, and then allowing them to have the confidence with it, knowing that the next time they pick that up, it's not going to be as fun. But yeah, that's just following more of Val Nesdakin's developmental stimulatory periodization model.
Yeah. I like what you said about, do we know exactly what's happening in the muscle? And in a sense, I remember it was at your seminar back, it was over 10 years ago now, I think, that I went to this one. It was with Val and Dr. Bondarchuk. And, Dr. Selyanov was talking about his thought of lactate inside the cell. I think eventually Pavel went and ran with that. Pavel Satsny went and ran with that one. But then it was funny because Val's like openly disagreeing with Dr. Selyanov in the middle of, I think, the seminar. I think it was more about what happens on the cellular piece. I don't know if they were disagreeing on the actual, like what actually happens. But so with that, I think it's important because I was looking at, Dr. Selyanov's work. It talks about, if you're an Olympic rower, you need to sustain these slow twitch fibers to be better. And I think we could all agree that makes sense if you have a strength endurance based thing to do. Living in the world where, we love outputs. I'm a track coach. I love outputs. Like it's one of my favorite parts of the week, always. But tell me a little bit about that balance, because obviously that's not all you're doing. You're doing explosive other activities. We talked about Olympic lifting throughout the course of the week. I'm sure that this has not had a negative impact on, you know, the scope of your players with like vertical jump, or if anything, after they get through it and they can hold that position and do better with the big lifts, I would imagine it could be a very strong positive at that point. So just for the sake of the output and the stimulus bucket, can we talk a little bit about, you know, how those mix and match and work together, or there's a synergy or a balance of what you're looking for with adaptation?
Yeah, you know, I think that a lot of times the rhyme and reason simply comes back to look good, feel good, play good for the guys.
Yeah.
And I know that that really, again, is just going to sound like the old man running away and ducking an answer, but I've got at least 4 guys that I know that when they get their plug and play for whatever that lunge strength exercise is on game day +1 are going to pick oxidative split squats. And I'm going to look at them like they're psychopaths. Probably because they are for picking that. But there have been at least 4 guys that are like, that's when I felt the best. Was like doing those. Like, why? I don't know. Like, and who am I then to try to argue with them about what they're noticing is best for their performance? You know, if they're like, I was playing my best then, I was moving my best then, my knees felt the best then, well then, let's go back to then. Like, let's go see if we revisit this, if that's really your answer. You know, if that's really your answer, then let's do that. You know, I think that, you know, going back to the art of coaching aspect of it, I think that all of it, in a world where in college basketball our teams are turning over by roughly 50% every year, having a uniform program is very important to get them to do things together, to try to develop a team. Now, we can talk about whether or not the weight room's job is truly that another day, but it's a great, in my opinion, opportunity for this group to get together, to know each other, to struggle through something, and to start to develop camaraderie and an identity. But it's also a great opportunity for them to explore and find out what's best for them, where they don't necessarily have to chase metrics. And because the metrics that I don't have are, does your jumper's knee bother you today? Like, are your feet sore? Is your back sore? You know, like, we could come up with the Jay DeMayo, Joel Smith greatest exercise of all time for basketball players. We're trademarking that now, so if anybody uses that, you owe us both a nickel. But if 3 or 4 players on the team say they do it and they each have a different ailment the next day that doesn't allow them to perform at their greatest level, it's not the best exercise for them. So I think that that's the other part of it, is teaching them, you know, this. And this was kind of a cool thing to talk about for a while, right? Is teaching them like an encyclopedia of exercises and allowing them to select what may or may not be better. You know, because then you do run into the men and the women who just sometimes look at it and they're like, easiest, easiest, lightest, you know. But were you going to win that battle if you told them to do the hardest one? Or were they just going to BS it and not put forth the intent desired to get the adaptation we want? So, I guess, short story long with that, what we've actually found is the opposite in a psychological manner. Is that when we've slowed things down and people have felt better, they've played better. And I don't know, man. Like, you know, I wish that there was like something cool, like, yeah, you know, we got them on the force plates and we did all this stuff and X, Y. Nah, dude. Yeah. You know, every time it works, it does.
Yeah. I like, yeah, that's the quote. I'm going to actually make a note that definitely makes the quotes in the little write-up here. Every time it works, it does. But that's the thing too, where like, I remember, I'm trying to write that down. Every time it works, it does. Okay. So like, what your story brought me back to, okay, when I was in college, this was, and sometimes you think about the things that you missed or that aren't around so much anymore. I think about that a lot, like 80s and 90s and all that stuff. And so This was circa 2004, 2000, maybe 2005, probably 2004. Like we used to do the Gambetta leg circuit. I think it was the off season. Oh yeah, because I was just thinking a lot of same mechanisms, right? Maybe you got the cellular squats, you got the iso lunge, you got the Gambetta leg circuit, all kind of the same energy, it's just a little different, on the outset. But so all right, so this jumper, another jumper on the team, he did high jump and triple jump, and I don't know how he figured this out, but like he just started doing that circuit on his own. I don't think the coach told him to before the meets, day before the meets. And I was like, why do you like that? Because it's like, right, it's like a lot of reps. It's like, I don't know, was it 40 total reps? So like you got 10 squats and 10 lunges and 10 step-up jumps and I think 10 tuck jumps at the end. I should know this. I feel bad. Sorry, Vern. I'm going to, that's the show notes. Like I gotta, do you know what it is?
I think it's 20 squats, 20 lunges, 20 step-ups, 10 squat jumps. But I don't know if that's the order. Squats. I think that's the order. Squats, lunges, step-ups, squat jumps. At least that's the one that we've done. And I was lucky. Vern came up here for a few days, and I was lucky for him to politely get me to do that. And it was, I was cooked, bro.
Yeah,
I was cooked.
There's something about, to me, one of the magic pieces in that, right, it is like just the jumps at the end. Because it's almost like if you did it and you didn't do the jumps at the end, I don't think it would be the same. It's like, and think about how people figure that out throughout history, right before we had phones that messed up our dopamine or whatever. I always appreciate that because I don't think it isn't intuitive to say, yeah, I'm going to do, especially in this day and age, right? Like that's not the things we want to explore is some of the higher rep pieces. And maybe we were running a modified version. For some reason, I remember more 10s. Maybe my coach had us doing 10s. I don't know what it was, but yeah, somewhere between 40 and 80 reps of, in the same cycle, you're doing all this stuff. And this guy's like, I jump better the next day when I do that before. He did 1, maybe 2 rounds of it. I don't remember. I'm like, I don't think I would feel that. I don't remember feeling that way. But I think I was a little faster twitch. This was a guy who was more like a 2-foot jumper, more of a slower strength jumper guy, a little stronger in the weight room than I was. I had more of that elastic pop than he did. So I didn't love it for that, but he did. He swore by it. I mean, I would rather do like a couple sets of 3 heavyish lifts and a few depth jumps or something, like whatever, stuff like that. I would do better with that. But he loved it. And so I guess I would always think like, maybe if you're kind of more that intermediate twitch somewhere in there and you got more of those fibers, that's what you need what will fully stimulate your physiology. And it's like, that's that window of, what fully stimulates your physiology. Because, hey, if you got some intermediate or maybe slower, slow twitch, fibers, you need something to stimulate that, and then throw a little bit of that like fast twitch innervation at the end. It's almost like a trick, right? You get it going, you bring it to the party with this slow stuff, and then you throw some fast stuff in there. And the slow twitch is like, well, I guess I got to do this too. So I don't know. I really don't know. But I think a lot too. Like I mean, for me, I don't do as much. Like my iso lunges are not as long now, and I would say my top end speed at age 41 is probably better than maybe 3 years ago when I was just pounding out the 4 or 5 minute iso lunges. But when I was pounding out those lunges, I could jump 2-leg jumps, anything that was in that maybe slightly slower realm of what might be asked of a basketball player. I mean, it's all fast, but like compared to sprinting like a fly 10, a lot of things on the court are slightly slower. And I was fine for that. So it felt good. Like my 2-foot jump was great and my squat was good. And I don't know. There's a lot of ways you can go with it, but I think that I love how you just the long and short of it, as I'm thinking about it, I love how you give athletes the chance for that. And you can see what stimulates their physiology. That goes beyond, well, the textbook says this and it says that, and so you're going to respond to this. And let me, like you said, let me not lecture you about the the mitochondrial density and the type 1 whatever fibers, But yeah, to try it and see. Tell me more about how that works. You said the +1. I don't know if we talked about that last time. Definitely tell me a little bit about how that works and how you set guys up for the game day and the things you could learn with that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really just kind of what I was getting at before. Is just it's sort of like a regenerative, recoverative, sort of like a preparation and a projection day, right? So a stretch, some form of a strengthening movement, and then one of Doc's special exercises. Mixed in with like the pulling that we do on day 1. So pull-ups, some sort of row, some sort of upper back. Want to do some arms? Great, cool. Have some fun with it. And then the second day is going to just be more of your French contrasty type stuff. The guys seem to love it, and they really get after it. The day after the game is probably the one that they sort of bang their heads with a little bit more, because it's not the fun, it's not the gym wears are out. We're not chucking med balls and trying to hit the top of the ceiling. It's, okay, stretch. Okay, open up. Okay, try to make it a little bigger. Okay, prepare yourself for practice. What we used to have a fourth layer to game day plus one, is that they would get into some sort of the running exercises, right? So it would be like a knee drive with a step up, and then like the leg to leg, or like the springy runs, right? So ankling-ish bouncing. Then we would get into the lunges, and then that would get into like leg to leg bounce or bounding. And then the side lunges would get into lateral bounds or into 45-degree bounces. And like we would watch that, and we would watch like how the first set was like this, and the second set was like that, and it was like so much better, and the projections were great, and all the bounds and the lunges looked great. We were a 500 team, and everybody hated it, and I had to take it out because it was just like, to a man of the 16-man roster, I want to say 10 of them were like, dude, the bounds and all that, that was just too much.
Yeah,
I was like, yeah, but you know what? Like, if you watched it, it was like,
oh yeah, that's so cool.
It really looked great. Like, but again, every time it works, it does, and for them, it wasn't. So, sometimes you just gotta cut bait and keep moving on. But yeah, so we start the off season with those 2 days and those progressions and those like blocks in mind, and then we build into that. Into like a 3 to 5 week phase at the beginning of the fall, that's going to be more about truly starting to move things that are heavier. And then after that, we get into building into trying to move things with pace and more of the, if you would call it power output or strength speed and speed strength, it'd be more that way.
So with the autonomy piece, like what the players get to pick for their pregame, or is it like the day before, the day of? Like, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, and if they want to come in on the day of, they get to pick a bunch of that stuff too. I mean, we do have like our fun little arm farm thing, which, we just show up and do some abs and some curls and some shoulders. I mean, shoot, bro, we've had like, of a 30-person travel roster, we've had 26 people show up to a Courtyard Marriott gym to try to get a workout in. You want to test your creativity, that's how you do it right there. But nah, dude, it's on the game day -1, we usually give them at the top, there'll be 2 blocks, and it'll be like pick one, and then below it, it'll say if you picked one, pick one of these 3. If you didn't, do all 3. So I mean, you could always do all 5. Like, if you want to do all 5, like, I ain't got nowhere to go. You can be in here for an hour and 45 minutes and do all 5. Cool. As long as practice doesn't start in that hour, have a blast. But yeah, we've got some different ones that we've found success with. We've got some new ones that we're going to add because there are some positions that we think we need to get better at, and that, especially like in basketball, I think like one of the exercises, and Natalia has talked about this in her chapter in the manual and in some of the writings that she's done for us, like the importance of like that pullover and getting into like a combined drop and a regular, like almost like a shock method drop throw over your head, and that action. I think Doc would have agreed with that. So building that in is something that's going to be different for us this year. But yeah, it's just going from where we've seen things be successful and players have had good buy-in, and then backing out and being like, what are the steps we need to be able to do that, and sort of try to dumb it down as best we can, and I mean, really hope we don't mess it up.
Yeah. I like, just that, again, just kind of speaking to that, like giving athletes kind of a choice and understanding more about, that it's an ever-present balance, right? Like, all right, here you have to do this, here, this, and it strikes me that the closer to game day you get, the more that autonomy slider, if it was a slider, the more that would become the ball is more in their court as you move closer.
Yeah. Especially guys that get more minutes.
Yeah.
You know, like the guys that get more minutes, you know, there's a lot more, for the most part, leniency with it. The guys that get more minutes and the guys who have been in the program longer. So I've got 2 3-year guys and a 4-year guy right now, who, for, you know, they understand the principles and the build outs, and there'll be probably a lot of questions from some of the new guys that are like, well, why do they get to do this? And it's like, well, they've earned it.
Yeah.
You know, and they know what is important and what we're trying to accomplish. And no offense, like, you're just not there yet. Like, you're only here 10 months. Like, just do this. Help me out. You know?
Yeah, it probably, I think, a program too where it's like you see where someone is and they get that thing, you know, like they get the choice. It's more than just, hey, maybe they get these exercises or they get these more. It's like they also get the choice. I think there's something that I'd imagine the younger players see. It's like, yeah, I'm excited for when I get to, you know, have that ownership, because it shows you've learned too. It shows that not just you can do it, but you've also learned more about yourself.
100%, bro. 100%. Because that's just kind of how this whole thing has changed, right? Is it's like, at the end of the day now, like, there used to be all the talks about, oh, we want to prepare you to be a pro, and nutrition and your routines and all this, that, and the third. And don't get me wrong, that's all important. But now with how this landscape has changed, you know, conversations changed, and, you know, daily interactions have changed. And now it's more about helping them understand how they can make the game of basketball work as hard for them in the long run as they've worked for it. And that gets into all sorts of different conversations. I mean, shoot, bro, like, I've got 2 guys texting me during this call. One of them sending me a protein powder that he's buying at home. The other one asking me about Rich Dad Poor Dad and a part of his book. You know, like, this is why you got into real estate. And it's like, yeah, you know, like, that's a part, like, that when looking back at all of these pivots and these changes, I think that's the part that's really been the most fun for me, is expanding outside of just like box squats with chains are good. Yeah. You know, like,
chains good.
Yeah. Band's better, chains good. You know, like, getting out of that kind of I don't know, bro. Like, what do we call it? Like the Neanderthal strength coach, and being like the coach that these young men and women have for the rest of their lives, like the person that they can come back to and talk about other things other than my knees hurt. You know, I think that's probably been like the coolest part.
Yeah, that element, for me, like, that was often, I would always go in with just purely like, you know, this exercise, that exercise, and then you realize at some point that sometimes it was almost that wasn't the greatest impact you may have had on particular athletes, you know, and, like, you know, the relationships or what they learned, you know, about training coming out of it, just being such a huge aspect. So I couldn't agree more with you there, Jay. But hey, I don't think I got through all the questions, but that's okay today. I think that's a great place to wrap it up, you know, just between the structure, so many pieces of the art of coaching, and then that autonomy piece. I learned a ton. I really appreciate talking to you. I appreciate what you do. So thank you for being on the show. It was great talking to you again.
Yeah, Joel, always great to see you, bro. Really appreciate everything you do to help us be better, man. And, you know, always here if you need, you know, somebody to rant for another hour and a half. You know, just keep pointing at clouds and yelling at them, as Jeff Moyer likes to say I love to do. Things just grind my gears. But yeah, man, it's always great to see you. It's always great to hear your voice, bro. And I'm super excited for everything that you're doing for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jay.